Hello, everybody, and welcome back to that Milan podcast. A special episode today. As you can see, we're recording on Sunday. Martino Puccio, Matt Santangelo, and literally the biggest Milanista probably in the Northeast, literally, Matteo Bonetti of CBS Paramount Plus. So, Matteo, thank you for joining us finally. It's been a long time coming for this.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. More of a Middlesbrough fan these days. I'm looking at myself here in the video. It's like I'm in a hostage room right now. It doesn't look as organic or natural. I'm not sure about this blue screen.
Yeah, I know you can't be bringing intercolors onto the podcast like this, but we can make an
Empoli, we could go with another team.
Okay, or Brescia. But yeah, really excited to get into this pod. Obviously, guys, as you can see by the title, we're going to get into everything regarding Milan. Obviously, it's a little difficult at the end of July to kind of see where the squad is going to be towards the start of the season. Just a few weeks away from the Coppa Italia match against Bari, and then Cremonese, I believe, is the first match for Milan. Which, again, if you're in the States, my bosses probably won't like this, but you can go and follow and watch every Serie A match on Paramount Plus. Bonetti's on the call for multiple games in studio with Marco, Papi, and then Grella, I believe, right? That's the quadruple team that you guys are going to have this upcoming season still?
Yeah. As far as I know, there's no changes. We have the league for one more season. So hopefully it's going to be the best one yet. We've been together now since, 2021? And I think for the first time in the US, at least since I can remember, I was with BN from 2012 to 2018, then ESPN 2018, 2021. This is the first time we've ever had a dedicated Serie A studio show that's weekly in the US. Since I can remember, because before that it was like Fox Soccer was bouncing around, but there was nothing like a weekly studio show.
Yeah, no, I think it's been great. Everybody really likes it. I mean, ESPN FC, they give you a hard time sometimes whenever Serie A came up, but it's been great coverage and we really appreciate it. So let's kind of get into the Milan season preview, but first we'll kind of track back a little bit to what last season was to kind of get your thoughts on it. I mean, basically from match day one, it was a mess for them. They never really bounced back from it. There was a couple good and surprising results here and there in the fall. And then 2025, basically after the Supercoppa, everything fell apart. And, from managers to different players to drama within the dressing room with guys like Morata leaving mid-season, splurging cash on other players in January as well to kind of put a Band-Aid on whatever that situation was. What was your kind of full scope of last season? Because I thought relative to expectations in the 21st century, this was the most disappointing season for the club.
It was the most disappointing season, and we watched all those games in the 2010s and the so-called banter era with the likes of Kevin Constantino, Mesba, Digao. We can go forever with all the bidoni that were with Milan, all the players that should have never been anywhere near the club. And those teams actually, for the most part, finished even higher up than last season's finish, which is an absolute disgrace. And Martino, we've debated a few times about this heatedly, but also jokingly on social media about Stefano Pioli. And I was always with you in the sense that Milan needed a fresh start. I think Stefano Pioli still is overly criticized by the fan base given what he did, but I thought it was time for a fresh start. I just thought that fresh start needed to be a manager that was a clear upgrade. Paulo Fonseca was absolutely not that, and Sergio Conceição was a complete 180 on the tactics of Fonseca. So that just showed me once again Furlani, Ibrahimovic, Moncada having no clear direction with where they wanted to go with the squad. The Fonseca hiring was not exciting for anyone. The Curva Sud was already against it, just like they were against Julian Lopetegui, who was linked to the club even before Fonseca was hired. Remember those rumors, the No Petegui hashtag that the Curva Sud fans brought to Milanello? So I thought it was clear that it wasn't going to be a managerial switch that would have shown an upgrade, and it turned out to be a massive downgrade. A club that was finishing the Champions League positions for the last 4 seasons, now finishing mid-table. And even having to do the Coppa Italia preliminaries, it was an absolute disgrace of the season. I think you hit the nail on the head. Maybe the worst that we've seen, given the expectations, the talent, which was so much greater than the 2010s. This is the biggest embarrassment of a Milan season that I can remember in my lifetime.
Santangelo, Ranieri had a comment, I believe, towards not too long ago, where he said, individually, Milan had the most talented team in the league. Whether or not that's a tongue-in-cheek comment from him, and he's just being a decent guy. What are your thoughts on that? Because I think a lot of people kind of had those sentiments about them, where individually you looked at some of the players, Maignan, Matteo, Leao, and whoever else. Pulisic's been great too. There was never that cohesive unit together that you saw under even Pioli, even when they struggled, because they still finished second the year prior to that, even though they weren't close to Inter. They never performed this poorly in Serie A and across all fronts.
No, and I think, it's me and Matteo, we had, or I guess a little bit more like, weren't as intense back and forth, because I think like I would quote tweet him, he would reply, and it would be like, we're both saying the same thing and agreeing on the same thing, but we're saying it differently. And I was in full agreement. I think that their last season was the cycle ending, right? You had guys like Giroud, you had Kjaer, you had Ibrahimovic who had already left. So it felt as though that with Pioli leaving, it was like, all right, we're getting rid of this coach, which more or less everyone universally agreed we needed to move on from, provided it was like a head and shoulders upgrade. Someone of the ilk of, didn't have to be Conte. I know everyone wanted Conte, but someone to move the needle, someone that you can like build a project with going forward. And it wasn't. And I think that's interesting too, because preseason gave us some really false expectations about what that Milan would look like. I went to the Manchester City game, and all of a sudden you're seeing Liberali, you're seeing Torriani, and you're like, this Fonseca's got these guys playing perfect football. We're going to be good this year. And then you get into the season, and it's not just the play specifically. It's immediately how much friction that you seem to see play out on the field. The water break, the water cooling thing with Leao and Teo, that obviously, they tried to keep in-house and say it's not an issue. We moved on from it. But early on, the problems that persisted with regards to the changing room and the dynamic, and ultimately the players buying in, seemed to fracture. And I think that kind of set the tone for the entire season, because they never really went on that sort of crucial run that they needed, right? Towards the end, there were, those they're mathematically still alive, theories, things going on like that. And they never were able to string together consistent football enough to the point where they were able to be in a conversation at all for top four or even a Europa League spot. So, yeah, I mean, I think that, for all the criticism that this management, this regime has gotten over the past years, last year was a more of an indictment of that management. And I say that because Pioli wasn't a redbird hire. That was one of the guys that stayed on when they let go of Maldini, let go of Mazzara, sold Tonali. So Pioli was like the last guy. Now it's okay, fine. You're going to get rid of this guy. Who's the replacement? And proof it was in the pudding. The market was a disaster. The coaching hire was a disaster. 6 months. Even he had to go and face the media himself after that Roma game, right? And then the guy you bring in, Conceição, who everyone wanted, also a disaster. So it's a fresh start. We're obviously going to get into what this played out this summer. That's currently going on with the market and Max Allegri. But yeah, last year was a disaster on all fronts.
Yeah. And then what you were kind of talking about is those changes, because the culmination of it was really that sacking of Maldini and Masada, which was late into June. And as we know, a lot of modern clubs that have a lot of success have a lot of their business sorted out by that point. They know where they're heading a couple weeks away from the start of the season and training. Milan weren't even close to that. They sacked those two, and I know we're still going back a little bit, but you see the replacements weren't really replacements. They just internally promoted a lot of people who never really had experience in that area, where Moncada has been a scout the majority of his career and is still relatively young in terms of this career too, was basically launched into a director position. I believe was it Diotavio or Diomico? Diotavio was the sporting director who ended up getting sacked, and no one really saw or thought he had any influence to begin with. So they were operating without a sporting director. They sell Tonali shortly after that. And then there was no real plan of all these players. A lot of misprofiling of midfielders, Bonetti, that we saw. A lot of them had the same qualities, and they stuck with a double pivot that didn't really make sense for these players and their characteristics. Like Tijani Reinders, out of possession, is not a great defensive player. He's better closer to goal, and as we saw with that sort of production this season, that's where he's better suited. But forcing him RLC in a double pivot didn't really make much sense. And they were basically carrying that out even through that January transfer window, where they were basically scrambling and trying to fix their mistakes of the of this past summer, where it's Emerson Royale, where it's Morata for Giroud, where they're not really actually upgrading. They're kind of cutting corners and hoping that these players can be decent enough to make top four. What did you think of their strategy? Because it just kind of didn't make a lot of sense outside of those managerial hires.
Oh, we're pretending like they had a strategy. I didn't see one. And
I'm being
in terms of the
generous.
formation, like not to get too much into the numbers, but 4-2-3-1 was not really a good fit because of the holding midfielders. I think this was a clear three-man midfield, right? Where you have the central guy, maybe Fofana, even though I'm not the biggest Fofana fan. I think he's an above average player, but he's no Kessie or Sandro Tonali.
Yeah.
And then you have Reinders on one side who can get forward, and then on the other, I would have loved a Loftus-Cheek of the Stefano Pioli season, the guy that scored 10 goals and was getting forward, but that guy was nowhere near his best form last season. It was also, I think, an indictment on the managerial situation, the scenes behind in the dressing room. I had heard in the start of the season that there was a lot of unprofessional stuff going on behind the scenes. There was no clear leaders. And then a few of the ex-players kind of echoed those same sentiments that I was hearing from people who worked inside Milan. You saw Davide Calabria saying something similar when he was loaned to Bologna, and then Alvaro Morata saying something very similar when he was sent to Turkey halfway through the season, that basically wasn't a fit with the manager and that there was some weird stuff going on behind the scenes that wasn't conducive to a very successful and professional team, which is why I think that the addition of Luka Modric, even if this guy hardly plays, he'll have the same impact as Zlatan Ibrahimovic had as a player, where the young guys were terrified of pissing him off. And he could literally just grab them by the ear and say, this is how you do things. And they would listen to him and they would get things done and they would run harder and they would train like professionals. I think Luka Modric commands that sort of respect. So that is exactly what they needed. They had no senatori. They had no experienced players that were like consummate professionals behind the scenes. Morata is a consummate professional, but he's more of a soft-spoken guy. And a lot of the big name players on the team just aren't the kinds of prototypical leaders that you read about in books. I don't know if Leao is that guy and Theo Hernandez is not that guy either. They're kind of like secondary
They sold
pieces.
him to Newcastle, the guy who should have been that leader, I think.
Yeah, Sandro Tonali's still quite soft-spoken. I'm talking about the hoorah kind of guy behind the scenes. Gennaro Gattuso, I think, was the perfect embodiment of this, and then Paolo Maldini with his elegance and his kind of you speak when spoken to kind of aura around Milanello. But there needs to be that Gattuso, and I think Ibrahimovic was that guy in the last seasons with Milan. Even though he was hardly playing, he commanded a certain level of respect that was just not there. It was like this a bunch of mavericks right behind the scenes, especially when the team needed to pick themselves up, and the collapses in the first halves of game under Sergio Conceição, it was all very worrying, right? It was like, what are these guys doing behind the scenes in training? How are they getting the first 45 minutes wrong so many times? And I think it goes back to the way these guys were training, the friction that there was with the manager. Sergio Conceição is a bit of a dictatorial approach, and that rubs a lot of players the wrong way. Morata himself, he was not the kind of player that thrived under that tough love. He needs someone to put his arm around him. And you have to know that, I think, as a manager, the best managers know how to get each and every one of these guys to tick. Some guys need the tough love. Some guys need an arm around their shoulder. And if you kind of bully them behind the scenes, that's when they'll just drift away even more. And I think that was ultimately the undoing of Conceição, is that he just wasn't popular with everyone. I think it's a specific kind of player that actually thrives under that sort of approach.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue to what Milan did, and that's hire Max Allegri. I kind of was loosely entertaining the idea in the middle of the season, where I was basically tired of seeing them conceding in the first half. And I said to myself, I'd take Allegri right now, where you don't concede whatsoever. You have a pragmatic approach, and you just pick up points, and you just worry about the rest later. This hire is very interesting on multiple fronts. A lot of people were skeptical of this because of his second tenure with Juventus and how that kind of went. I personally think it's much larger than just him in that scenario, because what we're seeing with Juve in recent years, after he even left after the first time, I know they won the Scudetto with Sarri even had the comment about how difficult it is to train those players and how difficult that situation is at Juventus. And we've seen multiple players flop, multiple managerial sackings and moving on. It's not just an Allegri thing. But he still might not be the most dated sort of manager these days with his tactics in Europe. But I don't think there's any doubt that this manager is able to get results. And to your point about player management, I think he's done a great job initially with not coddling Leao, but propping him up to make him feel like that this is his team and he's going to be in an environment that he could thrive in. So what have you really gathered about the Allegri hire to begin with and how he's handled it so far?
You know, with all the memes of him and Ballando con le Stelle where he's dancing to Coldplay, I guess at least he's not making out with one of his coworkers, right? You have to respect him for what he's done in his career. This guy's taking Juventus twice to the Champions League final, something that Conte was actually really underwhelming when he was at Juventus. He just couldn't get them deep into Europe, right? That famous quote of, I'm going to a €100 restaurant with a €10 no. Allegri went to the Champions League final twice and lost to much better La Liga teams that had generational talent, Ronaldo, Messi, etc. So I think Allegri's had an incredible career when you actually look at all of his accomplishments. Now, it's very easy to make fun of him. It's very easy to make fun of his style, the whole Cortomuso thing, and he talks about Ipica and horses all the time, and he says football is very simple, and he kind of underplays the tactics. But really, of course, he's drilling loads of tactics behind the scenes. And, just watching that Liverpool game, I don't want to take too much away from a friendly, but I think you can get little glimpses of what the manager's trying to do, and I don't think we had any sort of surprise of what Milan were doing against Liverpool, a team that was going to play this crazy high line, gegenpressing, all that good stuff. What do Milan do? They sit back with 5. They attack on the counter, and it doesn't have to be possession to entertain you. A lot of possession teams are actually not that fun. It's a lot of sideways passes back to the defense. One of the most fun teams I remember watching in my life? Jose Mourinho's Real Madrid. That team was the best counterattacking team that I've ever seen. And when they hit out on the counter and the passes with Benzema and Cristiano Ronaldo and the quality in the midfield to get them those passes, that was an incredible level of entertainment for me. I know it's subjective, but you can play a very entertaining brand of football when you're counterattacking. So, okay, Milan might not have 70% possession against everyone, and they might not face teams that press as high as Liverpool did and give you that much space to hit out on the counter. But the idea of, and let's just say it is Yashari, Modric, and Samuel Ricci, the idea of especially Modric and Yashari who play more long balls, Ricci kind of plays more of that side ball and just keeps things organized, right? But imagine Modric, Trivela outside of the boot to find Leao or Pulisic in space, and whoever the striker might be, maybe it's Dusan Vlahovic, I hope not. But that could be the way to unlock the very best version of Leao. Leao's never played with a midfielder with the quality of Luka Modric. Luka Modric is one of the greatest footballers of all time. He is a former Ballon d'Or winner who just played nearly 60 games with Real Madrid at a high level. Now he's only got to play 1 game a week. He can rest for 5 days. This is like such a high reward, low risk move. Milan, short contract to Modric. Okay, he's 40, but he's not a normal footballer. This guy is a generational talent that doesn't come around for every 20, 30 years. I'm really excited about the prospect of these two guys, Yashari, who's got a good long ball, and Modric, who's got one of the best passes in the world, finding these quick players and finding that constant outlet going forward when they spring on the counter. I don't think Allegri's Juventus had this sort of dynamic counterattacking presence like a Rafael Leao, and they didn't have in Luka Modric either.
The one thing too I find very fascinating in this modern era of football is, we look at every single signing or lack thereof under a microscope, right? If they miss out on this player, or we need a 6, we need an 8, we need a striker, we need a winger. And I think sometimes it really just boils down to how much does a new coach, a fresh mindset, a leader in that position move the needle. I think that Matteo, look at what Napoli did last year, right? That team, they didn't have a extraordinary market. This was a team that he got that was middle of the pack, 10th place, I believe, the year before. They didn't go out there. They lost Kvara mid-season. Victor Osimhen left. They had Kim Min-jae. He went to Bayern a year prior. They didn't go out there and all of a sudden give Conte the red carpet and give him 200 million war chests and make signings like they're doing now, right? Off the back of the Scudetto. But look how much the coach impact made on the players. You had certain guys just raise their game a little bit. They knew how to navigate the season, which I think is something that Allegri does extremely well, right? And me and Martino touched on this in previous episodes where, Allegri always sort of broke the season apart into two, and he always really emphasized the importance of being in the thick of things, being in that Scudetto race when it came time for March, right? The stretch run. And I think that Milan has the one game per week in their pocket, of course, with Coppa Italia coming down the road, that Allegri is one of the better managers that we have seen in recent years, know how to navigate a long season, right? Keep guys fresh. He will rotate. Again, it's not going to be always pretty. It's not going to be glamorous. It's going to be maybe some of the things we saw in the Liverpool game, right? Minimal possession, but what he's doing with the possession that he has and the players he has at his disposal is able to get results. And I think that is a way that they can win over the fan base, who is at this point on edge, right? They're following the market. They saw what we did last year. They want to believe in something going forward, that there is a project, there is a plan. So I think having Allegri in the thick of things is going to at least have players buy in. You're seeing it already. You're seeing players, I think, speak a certain way or act a certain way or carry themselves a certain way on the pitch. And I think those things are going to be very crucial, especially in the initial build up to the season. Because last year started very poorly. That weighs on you. Fonseca was immediately under the gun. He was being questioned about his job. If he didn't get the Derby win from Matteo Gabbia, he would have probably been sacked. So Allegri, I think, is a manager that is a stabilizer. He'll come in, he'll get players like Rafa to buy in. Rafa will do the things that he does, and be able to race his game under a coach like Max. That's how I feel about Allegri and what presence he could have.
I'm interested to see the position of Leao because he's been tried as this striker in a 3-5-2. I remember we interviewed Leao after the Napoli-Milan game, the season that Napoli won the Scudetto, that Milan went to the Maradona and put like 4 past them. We were there covering that game, and Leao, after he was playing as a striker in that game, and he said that he didn't like playing there, that he didn't like just the, wingers, they have this spatial awareness, which is normally just half of the pitch, right? Because they're used to having the touch line on the other side. But as a striker, you have to scan all around you in all degrees. So it's a very different kind of position. And Leao said that he didn't feel entirely comfortable there. Now, has something changed in 2-3 years? Maybe. Are we going to see a 3-5-2 to start the season? I'm not sure. I mean, are we completely giving up on Santi Gimenez? I don't think Gimenez is a Allegri type striker. I don't know what you guys think, but I feel like Allegri wants someone who's more physical and who can hold up play better. I don't know if Dusan Vlahovic is that guy. I know we'll talk about him in a second, but Vlahovic's first touch and passing is certainly not his strong suit. And that's not the strong suit either of Gimenez. I feel like Dusan Vlahovic is a better overall striker than Gimenez. Gimenez, to me, is like best case scenario Matteo Retegui, except that there's no Gasperini and there's no Atalanta system. So I'm not quite sure about Santi Gimenez, but it kind of feels like, and even it was weird how quickly the club almost gave up on him, right? He had a few bad games, and then he was just put on the bench for months in the second half of the season. This is a guy that you just spent 35 million on. I think he has some qualities. I think that he's a good finisher inside the box. I don't think he's like particularly physically gifted or technical or fast or anything else. He's like in that same branch of players like Mauro Icardi or Matteo Retegui, these kinds of strikers that are being phased out of the modern game. I wouldn't fully give up on him, but I wouldn't want to go into the season where he is my only guy. I think Milan need another really solid striker there. I just don't know if Dusan Vlahovic is that guy, and I think that the wages would cripple this club.
He would, he's gonna have to slice them in half. I think.
Yeah.
Why
would he though? Why would he when he could just stay at Juventus and collect it Divock Origi style, right?
Oh no, of course he could, or he could maybe start to value his career. Is my only counter to that. But again, money is money. It's easier to say that when you're not asking to take half a pay cut. With the Leao stuff, I know we've gotten into spirited things besides the Pioli stuff. Leao in general, I wanted your thoughts on him because I think everybody knows it by the comments outside of Casano. I don't think we're going to go into his, but almost every single person who watches him says kind of the same thing, even if they're casual watchers. Why isn't this guy the best in the world, or at least in the conversation for it? I think that's what a lot of people take away. A lot bring up this off-ball work, which to me is silly to an extent. I think there's certain times where you're like, okay, you can't be moseying around. You look like you're disinterested. That kind of stuff I don't excuse to an extent. But for me, I think the biggest criticism that should be warranted and I'm okay with is the lack of goal scoring. I think the inconsistency there is way too poor for a player of this caliber, right? Like we're seeing statistics. He hasn't scored at San Siro in 6 months, 7 months. That's inexcusable, I think, for a player of his caliber. Now, I think a lot of it has to do with this team being lacking possession and midfielders. Their midfield last season was just as bad as the defense. Everybody likes to point to the defense, but the defense is constantly going to concede if they can't hold on to the ball, if they don't have players that are winning back the ball. So when they don't really have possession that often, what is he supposed to do? He's going to have less opportunities. I think his strikers were really poor. Their top goal scorer last season was a midfielder who they sold. So who is he able to really get the ball to that we could sit there and say, okay, his numbers will be at a higher rate? He was still in the mix for top assister last season, and he didn't have a good striker or a striker, really, for the most part. We even saw it in the Coppa Italia final. He created the best chance for Milan in that one, and I forgot who messed it up that couldn't finish it. But I think I see that way too often with him, that Allegri needs to put him in the best position to succeed. I think a little bit of that formation that we saw against Liverpool and Arsenal had a lot to do with Jimenez not being there because of the Gold Cup and certain players still not arriving just yet. And obviously, they really only have one striker on the roster right now. Outside of, I guess, Okafor would be that vice striker for the time being, which is not really a good endorsement. But I think there's still another level for him to go. And I think Allegri has that consistency wise. I don't I never buy into this 26-year-old, like what we saw with Dembele this past year at PSG, where all of a sudden it clicks and this guy's scoring 15, 20 goals in a season. I don't think Leao is ever going to be that sort of player. I think if you're able to get 10 to 12 goals out of him and 15 assists, that's where he's at.
When Leao's flanked with Vitinha, Neves,
exactly.
Kvaratskhelia, Due. I mean, it's that team just won the Champions League. No, but I understand your point. Ousmane Dembele's final touch has always been a point of concern. Well, it wasn't before he joined Barcelona, but now he's like taking his play to the next level. Can Leao do the same? What do I think of Leao? I don't think Leao is a world-class player because he's too inconsistent to be that. I think if you were like in a character creation screen and you plugged in all of his attributes, I think you look at that and be like, this is a world-class player. This is a 6'2" winger who's built like a center back. Like if you see Leao, have you guys seen Leao up close and personal?
Yeah,
he's built like a wardrobe. He's broad-shouldered. He's thick. He's not like this skinny tall guy. He's really like an incredible athlete who just has this effortless run where he glides past people smiling, and it looks like he's not even working hard to do so. He's such a wonderful athlete to watch, especially if you watch him in person. You realize like how mesmerizing he is. And I think fullbacks look at this guy coming at you, and he does scare you. You'll scare the bejesus out of you when you see just how fast and explosive he can be. He's not a clinical finisher. This is the big problem I have with him. Yeah. He doesn't always make the right decision. And the most infuriating thing, which pisses off all the Milan fans I know that go to the San Siro where you can really see off the monitor, off the ball, is something that Martino highlighted, which is that he can drift out of a game if he feels like things aren't going his way. And you can usually see that quite quickly in a game if it's a game where Leao's feeling himself, or if he's just getting dispossessed a few times, then he gets fouled, and then he just starts looking towards the ground and walking when everyone else is jogging back. Now, in the modern game, unless you're Lionel Messi, I think, especially in a manager like, let's say, Conceição that demands that kind of work rate from the strikers, right? And Allegri is going to demand a lot of closing down too from the strikers. Mm-hmm. To me, I think that's where fans, rightfully so, got on his back. Now, Modric can play all the great passes to Leao in space, but at the end of the day, I think we have enough of a sample size of Leao in front of goal to know that finishing is just not his strong suit. He can have great goals, and he's really given us some wonderful individual moments and beautiful finishes. But when he's going for that curling effort, that thing is all over the place. Like, it's not like you're like, okay, that thing is going to be drilled right into that top corner,
I
the
like
center.
Suso, yeah.
And to me, that's the biggest issue with him. And I don't know. I don't know if he has it. I don't know if he's just a natural finisher. Some players just they can train all their lives and they just won't ever really have that ability in full flight to turn so quickly, create that little millimeter space and drill it and put it into the top corner. So I think he's going to have a very good season just because the counterattacking style suits him. The quality of the midfielders will help him. But I don't know. I don't know how much he can truly elevate his game. I hope, Martino, you're right that he can have this Dembele-esque rise where we're talking about Ballon d'Or and 30
Oh,
goals in a season. That's a dream. Absolutely a dream.
oh no. What I was saying with that was people are kind of hoping that happen. I don't subscribe to that. I don't think that happens. That was a rare
I don't think
case.
so either, but I mean that is
Yeah.
best case scenario, and it's a
It
good
is.
example. It's a good example because Dembele was sort of in the same bracket of Leao, wasn't even scoring as much as he was at Barcelona. So if he can have this renaissance at 26, 27, by all means, sign me up.
That's yeah.
Yeah, I think the one thing too with
Go for
real
it. Go
quick
for
with
it.
Rafa is he just turned 26. Like this is a player that's
Yeah.
been around, right? And I think there's also levels to the conversation, right? You touched on the label world class, right? I think he's a world class talent that gets that world
Yes.
class label, even if it's not warranted at times, right?
Yeah.
And I think you look at what Rafa came into Milan with as a youngster player they got from Lille for a pretty sizable fee, and a fee that kind of shocked a lot of people at the time because Milan weren't throwing money around. This was 2019. I know they spent a fair amount on players at that market, but they spent a ton on him for a project player at that time, and he had glimpses. Then he took that next step in the Scudetto year, right? So now I think you can make a strong case since that Scudetto year, he's sort of plateaued. Like he stayed that he's had moments, right? He's looked fantastic. You know, the Champions League game against PSG a couple seasons ago, where you're like, this guy, he could do this against PSG. He could do this at San Siro. He could destroy Napoli on his own in that run to the semifinal of the Champions League a couple years ago as well. And then he can have the games where it's like, okay, we have nothing going. We need our star guy to give us a goal so we can just get the win and get out of here. And sometimes, to your point, he gets disinterested and he needs space. So I think that's going to be the biggest challenge. But I think it's going to be fascinating to see it play out because Allegri has been very adamant on Rafa and him taking that next step. And I think that's a challenge for him. This is a coach that's coached top stars. You know, his first Juventus tenure, even his second, right, where he was Ronaldo, he's Dybala, all these guys. So he knows how to get players to perform. And I know it's maybe not always the more linear route, but I think that Rafa needs to buy in too. This is a two-way street too, right? We can't continue to excuse stars because I think the more you do that, the more you maybe flirt with the idea or potential outcome of it being a title situation where you give them too much rope, too much leash, and now all of a sudden disinterested and he's gone. So I think that this is a huge year for Rafa without question.
Yeah. There's other players that really need to step up their game this year. Particularly in the defense. I think Malik Chow was one of these guys, Matteo, that you and I had agreed upon could thrive in Allegri's system. Tomori is obviously, I think, is the do or die season for him. I think if he doesn't really get close to that level that he was in that Scudetto year, I think he's gone. With that, I think Chow, the best version of him that we saw, guys, was against Spurs in that Champions League. What was it? The round of 16, I believe, where he was a deep center back where he didn't have to track back and run with this high line pressing that Pioli liked to implement because he isn't the most pacey of players. At times he kind of gets bullied for somebody that is kind of a bigger frame and of an athlete of a bigger size. I think he needs consistency to play more often. I think he's actually an underrated passer, and quite a few people kind of see the same thing, but you never really saw Milan have the ability to get the ball at their center back's feet to kind of play at a slower pace. I think Ricci is one of those guys that'll help out with that. But who are you kind of looking towards on this squad that you're like had a negative season last year that could really improve year over year? Is it someone like Fofana, Chow, Tomori getting back to his old ways, or is there someone else that you're looking at and saying this guy fits what Max is capable of bringing out a great player?
Well, I think Max Allegri wants his defenders to not be as aggressive as like a Pavlovic is, right? He wants them not to give up that much of a risk behind. Allegri's first philosophy is to make sure that all your areas are covered at the back. So because no two center backs stand out, I think the back three is the best way to go here. We saw a clear improvement in the defense when Conceição midway through the latter half of the season when he signed up, he went back three, and the team actually started playing a bit better at the back, right? They weren't conceding as much. And it's like, okay, well, since no two of these guys are really good enough, maybe the antidote is you just throw in that third guy and things are going to work out just by virtue of having an extra defender back there to help out. I think right now, and they really need to sign another center back. There was rumors of Mario Gila, given that Ivitare, the Lazio link, likes Gila. I like Gila. I think Gila's quite a unique center back, the way that he carries the ball forward. He does a really good job with that, and he certainly would be a starter in a back three. But right now, it looks like it's going to be Chow in the middle, Tomori on the right, and then left-footed Pavlovic on the left with a Stupinian left wing back, and then right wing back, I would give it to Salamakers with Jimenez, who can fill in for both the flanks. I think the versatility of Jimenez and Salamakers is going to be great for Allegri, who loves to tinker. Guela Doué, Martino, we were talking about him before the pod. I think he can play right center back or right back, probably even right wing back. So he's another one that can fill in two positions if they were to sign him. I know that the price tag is a bit of an issue for Milan, as it feels like it is for every player that they're going for in this market. So to me, guys, the best way to start the season is what we saw in the friendlies, which is 3-5-2 or 3-4-3, even though I worry that might be a little too imbalanced. If you play Pulisic, Leao, striker, and then only two holding midfielders, I think the strength of this team now would be Ricci, Modric, Yashari, or if you don't get Yashari, I guess it would be Fofana and Ricci, and then Modric to kind of be the one who has all the tasks to go forward and to provide assists and score a few goals too. So 3-5-2 for me is the look, and if you can get a really good defender, which I haven't really seen any links. I know Giovanni Leone, everyone's going crazy about him, but the guy's played less than a dozen games. He still has everything to prove in Serie A.
Yeah.
I don't know, guys. Is that like what a defender at 18 who's coming to the club and is guaranteeing you this unbelievable success? Like Leone still needs to prove everything. I hope it works out for him and also for the Italian national team, but there's just not enough of a sample size on this guy, and he's linked to everyone.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, you saw right away, immediately in the summer market, early days, they tried to make a move for Malik Chow to go to Como. Fee was agreed, player wasn't convinced. And I think we quickly saw that, all right, we're seeing where the market is for center backs, right? 40 million for a player that untested. I mean, going from Parma to then a big price tag to a Milan or an Inter and being asked to be the savior of a back line, it's different conversation at that point, right? So I think that what Allegri is going to be tasked with is transforming some of these raw components that he has and making it into a unified, solid defensive back three. And, I think it's interesting because we saw what Tomori can bring in glimpses during his tenure at Milan. We know Malik Chow. Pavlovic had some very, very brief moments last year, but then you see him get spun around like a dreidel on many occasions. Same thing with Malik Chow, right? Gets caught up, doesn't have the foot speed, recover speed to get back, and then he's a walking red card. So I think that that's going to be the big test for Allegri is how do I get, Tomori being able to play high? How do I get Malik Chow being able to sit back and defend and maybe the good qualities that Pavlovic have and get them to play together as one? I think that's the big thing. But there's one player that I actually do think could be a bit of an X factor, provided he does stay healthy. It's actually Ruben Loftus-Cheek. I think that, Matteo, you mentioned a great point. I think he can be that one component that going forward is a great athlete. The athleticism has never been a question. It's always been the health. But in his first year, amidst all the chaos and uncertainty around his fitness record, he came in and he delivered quite a few goals. So I think that he could be one of those players that maybe is a little bit of an afterthought amidst all the midfield transformation that's needed. And it's someone that can raise the bar, because if he's able to be your fourth or fifth midfielder, it's a lot better than a Tommaso Pobega or some of these other guys that we've seen trotted out there in his place. So
yeah, and Yunus Musa, I would say, if you can get 20-25 million for Musa, I would sell him. I just don't think he's good enough to be a
I don't know
Milan
why
player.
they held
I'm
out for so much
surprised.
in Napoli.
I'm surprised that Napoli was in for him. We've watched Musa every second that he's played. He's the first player I can remember, by the way, that was subbed after 30 minutes in 2 games in a season.
Yeah.
Because of how destructively bad he was in those 2 games. He is not a player. I just don't think he has enough quality. I don't get it. He's like a mid-table Serie A player to me, but nothing more. So I really don't understand it. If you can get 20 million for Musa, personally, I would sell him. I think RLC has a much higher upside if he can stay healthy. The game that I think if you want to know what RLC can do in best case scenario, just watch that Milan PSG Champions League game from 2 years ago. That's where he had his best ever game. One last note on the center backs, right? So Giovanni Leoni, the price tag is what, 30 million? Why did Milan not go for the Italian defender that went to Brighton, Coppola? Why are they not going for Gilardi from Verona, who's linked to Roma? Like there's Sam Bokema. If you want to spend 30 million, just buy a guy that we have years and years of experience that he can do it at the highest level. He's played in the Champions League with Bologna. Of course, now Napoli's going to have more of a pull. They can offer you Champions League, Milan cannot. But I would have gone for Bokema, but more realistically, because I don't think Milan were going to spend 35 million. Coppola, 10 million. Coppola's Italian international, just went to the Premier League. Gilardi's another interesting young Italian defender that Roma want. Like, there's defenders out there that you can get. Sorry?
Comuzzo, I believe, right? From Fiorentina.
Comuzzo. Yeah, Comuzzo's another one that had a few links to Milan. These are all guys that would play for Milan, that they could be, right, I'm the anchor of this team. I'm young, and I'm going to get experience on a team like Milan, and yet they're not pulling the trigger on any of them. It doesn't look like they're going to get Leoni either. I really don't understand it. They do need another competent center back, someone to really challenge for those places.
I don't think they're capable of selling any of the 4 center backs in their squad. I don't think they would sell Gabbia because of keeping Italian players, and I think he's decent enough as a reserve.
He's fine, but we don't want him starting,
I don't think
right?
he should start. I don't think he should start either. But Tomori, who wants to purchase him, I don't think they have any suitors, especially from the Premier League. The same thing with Musa. I'm surprised that hasn't come through. I think they would need a sale there, because I think we all agree, like center back long term, are we sure any one of these 4 center backs are going to be here starting 3 years from now? And I think the answer would be probably no. Next year, if you want to be like that. I don't think so. So there's a lot to move, and especially with the market, which we'll just jump right into right now, because we are hauling with this conversation here. There's been links to all 3 of these guys. They really are not going away. We've seen kind of Leoni, as you mentioned, a name floated out there, and then things sort of die out. I would bet if there's somebody to get him, it's probably going to be Inter. But Yashari, Due, Vlahovic, this Yashari thing in Club Brugge and these negotiations, eerily similar to CDK, who we were all fawning over a couple of seasons ago, just to not even score a goal for Milan. A lot of fans are really drawing parallels with that, just because the negotiations are very similar, even though they play 2 entirely different positions. Yashari was player of the year in Belgium. Let alone young player of the year. He was player of the season. He had really good features within the Champions League, plays and debuted for Switzerland, who is a very respectable and good national team. The price and the haggling, these negotiations are just irritating, just flat out true. We see Tade today basically comment and say, this is our last offer. They improved the initial base of the deal. I believe it went from only 32.5 million to 33.5 million euros. So they only improved it by 1 million euro. And then I believe the bonus is around 5 million to get to a total around 30.
That's a lot. Guys, that's a lot of money.
It is.
Okay, yeah. So right into it. That's a lot of money for 1 year in a respectable league that sends out a Champions League team. It is not top flight, but it has produced quite a few talents and quite a lot that have succeeded in Serie A. For you, where is the line here? Is it this last offer and then you walk away and you go somewhere else and invest that money? What are your sentiments with this? Because I get it. He was at Barcelona, Milan 15 years ago. It's cool. He only wants them, blah, blah, blah. But at a certain point, we're basically at the start of August. You have to make a decision eventually. Well, what do you think of this with Milan and Yashari?
Well, to me, if you want a guy this badly, right, and you've been chasing him the entire summer, and you're willing to let him slip to then go for some rushed and panicked plan B that just some random name that's thrown out, you just got all this Reinders money, right? And how much was it total for Reinders with bonuses included?
It's like
65.
close to 70,
Okay,
65.
65. Yeah. So are you going to let this guy slip that you really want? Clearly, Tade has identified this guy and says, right, this guy is going to be the biggest piece of our midfield. Milan don't often spend near 40 million euro for anyone these days. So they really like him, and they're going to let him slip away for the difference or one or two down the stretch and then make a panic move of a guy that we haven't heard of yet. I went on I only look. I watched this guy in the Champions League when Club Brugge played good teams, and he did stand out. Like he looks. And I went on Scout and watched a lot of his touches in the domestic league, which is harder to judge because there's some like absolute cones that he's going up against. But look, he's good. He's a bit undersized for the position. He doesn't look like the most physically imposing player, but he plays that way. Like he'll go diving into challenges. He's aggressive. He reads the game well. He's quick and feisty. But then he's got a nice long ball, and he's technically gifted with the ball at his feet. So he has a lot of different tools that make him a very interesting player. Like when you watch him, you can see why Milan are very interested in him. I think he's more of a sure thing than a CDK. And I remember CDK headlines coming out when Milan were interested in him, people saying, no one knows like who he actually is. What is this guy's best position? We still don't know because he's played kind of all over the place, and he's a bit of this footballing enigma. We know exactly what Yashari is, where he likes to play as a holding midfielder. I think that with him and Ricci, they can kind of complement each other because he'd be more the guy who can spray the balls forward like a Modric, and Ricci's going to play more of like a Jorginho role, right?
Yeah.
Where he's just keeping things tidy in front of the defense, and he's a more defensive and physically gifted player, Ricci is, than Jorginho. But I think that midfield three is quite exciting to me personally. Like that is a lot of passing ability, technical ability, high IQ players, Modric, Yashari, and Ricci. That gets me excited. That looks like one of the best midfield trios if everything goes to plan.
And then Fofana and RLC off the bench is
that's guys. That's a really, really, really interesting midfield. Now the issues as we talked about is the defense. Who's the striker going to be? But the midfield, to me, looks way better than last season. And that's crazy saying that, given that Reinders is leaving. But Reinders was the only guy that we could count on last season.
He was the only good midfielder.
Now you've got three guys that you can rely upon, and you know pretty much what you're going to get.
Yeah, I think the one thing that's interesting, too, about the midfield conversation, which we could go all day on, is, you got such a big offensive boost from a Tijani Reinders. But I think with formation change, I think it's going to not really require you to get as much in terms of goals and assists from the midfield. I could be wrong. I know Modric has had pretty good numbers in those departments, but at 40, you don't expect him to be a 10-goal scorer, provide 7-8 assists from that position. They're going to be asked to do different things. So I think that the way that this, Max Allegri team is set up and fielded, you might not need someone to do exactly what Tijani is. Maybe just more balanced, more that sort of approach is what's going to ultimately get the most for Milan. But I think with Yashari, it's interesting too, because I think you're spot on. And I think that, more so speaking on the negotiation side, if you're going to kick this can down the road for a month and incrementally increase your offer to the point where you're ready to lose the player for 1 million and then go for a fallback option, what did that do last year? Granted, Joshua Zirkzee wound up being an absolute flop at Manchester United, but this was the guy they wanted to get. 40 million, he's ready to go. And then they were like, Alvaro Morata and Tammy Abraham, right? And Jovic. Those are our three guys. And that was terrible. So I think if you like the player enough and you trust the scouting department, you trust Tade, who you brought in to assemble this team for Max Allegri, I think there's, in my opinion, this deal has to get done for Milan. This would be such a bad way to bow out of these negotiations, because now everyone's going to look at the microscope and say, who did you get in replace of Yashari, and how does Yashari where does he wind up becoming? because if this player winds up becoming the player that is worth 40 million somewhere else and it's not at Milan, they're going to have answers or questions to answer, because in the same thing, that's what it was with CDK, right? All the time and the resources, the investment of energy into the market to get CDK, and Maldini pretty much lost his job because of that. So I think that there's a lot of things that hinge on this acquisition. I like what they did with Ricci. I think the fee was great. Modric we touched upon. Terracciano is a backup goalkeeper. That's fine. And Estupinian, right? So they've made some good moves, but I think now it's crunch time, right? It's August. They got to get these guys over the line. But on the Doué thing, Matteo, again, Strasbourg are holding out for what appears to be 30 million. I would be stunned if Milan go that high. They've went from 15 to 18. It seems like they're
in the 20s lately.
22, 23.
Yeah.
But the conversation hasn't sort of broken down. It seems like Strasbourg might be willing to say, if you can get 24 fixed plus 3 in bonuses, we might be able to play ball and do something with that. But on Doué, what do you think of him? Do you think he's someone in that right back department that can bring what Milan need? Because I think the conversation that I see a lot of people having is, if you're going to have Estupinian on the left side, who by all accounts brings probably more on the defensive side than Teo did to help alleviate some of the stresses and the defensive requirements that Rafa might need. And then on the right side, you have Pulisic, who is a worker. That's a workhorse. But then someone who maybe can provide more defensive on the right side. What do you think of Doué and how he would potentially fit within this Max Allegri team?
Yeah, by the way, I really like this Stupinian signing. I think 17 million is a very good deal for him. If you look at the response from Brighton fans, people who watch a lot of CONMEBOL. I used to cover CONMEBOL. I know Stupinian really well from the Ecuador national team. This is a very good fullback that Milan have gotten for an incredibly reasonable price. Now, I think Brighton, because they signed the Kuiper, they were willing to let Estupinian go, right? But look, Doué, and the thing that is kind of frustrating is that Milan are actually linked to guys that we don't cover those leagues, but I go and I have friends that work for La Liga TV. I asked them, what do you think about Javi Guerra? And what do you think about that guy, the Almeria right back, Pinel? What was his name again?
Pubil,
yeah. And they're like, these are good players. These are really competent players, especially Javi Guerra. Javi Guerra is a guy that I was actually kind of upset that I stopped hearing his name floated around, because for a long time before Yashari, that was the name that I kept seeing linked to Milan, is this guy Javi Guerra. He's a very technically gifted player, tall, kind of like a Reinders clone in a way, the way that he moves with the ball. So I was hoping that would get brought up again, but I haven't seen much of Javi Guerra to Milan or that Almeria right back, who would have been half the price, I believe, of Guela Doué. And is a player that is very physical, 6'3", can get forward, and by all accounts, people who have watched him really seem to like him as well. The thing with Doué is, look, Strasbourg bought this guy a few years ago for 5 million, and now they're trying to flip him for 5 times more. This is the same thing with Yashari, right? It's like you're trying so hard to get that last bit of squeeze out of Milan, and you just can't. And it must be so frustrating to negotiate with these guys. If you want the player this bad, and if it's dragging on for 2 months, just get it done before one of the Premier League teams says, you know what? And it can be a team that just got promoted from the Championship. 25 million, yeah, we'll have that guy. And they just come in at the last second and they steal him away. And Milan and the penny pinching out the door. No more negotiations on the table. I think Doué would play the fullback role. I'm not sure if you're going 3-5-2, then I would be fine with just having Estupinian on the left, and then the right. I'm fine with just having Salamakers and Jimenez.
I agree. Yeah.
But I don't think that those two guys are as adept to playing as in a back four as a more defensively minded, quote unquote, traditional fullback, even though fullbacks now are, a lot of them are wingers that move backwards. Yeah. I think Jimenez could do it. He has done it in the past. Salamakers a little bit less so. I think Salamakers more of a winger/wingback. Jimenez more of a fullback/wingback. So I would be fine with going to the new season with those two guys on the right. And then on the left, I guess you have Bartezaghi as the Stupinian backup, and those are your 4 fullbacks. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world.
No. But is the worst thing in the world signing Dusan Vlahovic as your alternate striker to Santi Jimenez?
It's up there.
I don't understand the profile and comments made by management and then the players that they're going after, right? Because Tade gave an interview, and whether it's bullshit or not, for lack of a better term, where he's like, we want a striker with the profile of Olivier Giroud, which doesn't make sense because of what we were talking about with Santi Jimenez and what his best qualities are more of a poacher than he is of a complete number 9 these days, of back to goal, distribution, running in behind the defense. We know he's not any of those things. But neither is Dusan Vlahovic. And Vlahovic is the highest paid player in the league as of right now with his current Juventus contract, which is, again, I reiterate that to everybody, the highest paid player in the league that went for 70 million. He hasn't come close to the best version of himself at Fiorentina. The best version of him at Juventus was under Max Allegri, where I think he had 16 goals was his best season. We know what his left foot is, but the rest of him, I mean, the rumored fee is around 20 million with 1 year left on his deal. With the way strikers are priced, I understand where that's coming from. It's going to have to be more than half his wages cut for this to work. And he's going to have to accept that.
Why would he? You know what? Look, why?
Yeah,
it's 1 year left, right? Why would he accept? Why would he lose out? Just even think about this, and I can't blame him. Like, why would someone just give up 6 million euro to go from 12 something net to 6, which is still, I think, a lot of money for Dusan Vlahovic.
He would be tied for highest paid player at Milan.
How many goals did Dusan Vlahovic score from open play in Serie A? Because I was doing commentaries of Juventus almost every week, and I remember that open play goal tally was in the single digits for the longest time ever. And we're talking about a guy that is getting 12 million euro net. The gross is, what did you say, over 20? You know what I would do at this point, since it's pretty clear that Milan aren't going to get a guy that's the finished product? I wouldn't get Højlund either from Manchester United, by the way. I would do a 1 year deal for Duvan Zapata. Okay, perfect Allegri striker, high reward, low risk. He's coming off an injury. I love Duvan Zapata, and you have him with Santi Jimenez. You can see if Santi Jimenez can be the real deal in a league like the Serie A and take the next step up and be a 20-goal season striker. I don't think he will be, but at least Duvan Zapata will give you what Allegri values in a striker, and you don't have to pay him all this money, and you know exactly what you're going to get. I would do that. It's not sexy. I don't think Milan fans are going to be like, oh, we got Duvan Zapata, but I like Duvan Zapata a lot. To me, that is, if I was sporting director Matteo, and you're throwing out these crazy names to me, having to pay all the money to a guy who has a hard time stopping a ball, okay, in Dusan Vlahovic, and connecting on a simple pass, and who has had the most comical misses in front of goal that you could put together on a low light reel. This is not a player that is deserving of superstar money. This is a contract for a guy that they thought was going to score 30 goals a season when he came over from Fiorentina. He's not that guy. So to me, I would just abandon that. I would abandon Højlund. Milan need an experienced, physical target man that Allegri likes. Allegri, we know, look what he did with Mario Mandzukic. That's why I would say just go for a Duvan Zapata. It doesn't have to be Duvan Zapata, but a player like that. Go for a veteran like Oli Giroud or Zapata who can hold a play, who's big, that you can't move, that can link together a pass or two. And to me, that's much safer bet, knowing that you also have Santi Jimenez that you just signed for 35 million. What do you guys think? Am I off base here?
It's the same old story for me, and it's just they want to cut corners at certain positions, and this is what they get. Truthfully, I mean, they panicked when they put it this way. When they knew that they weren't keeping their manager that they hired in January, they still went on to go and spend 35 million on a striker, and then go around, hire a sporting director, hire a manager who maybe have not liked that player. And they put themselves into a position where they used 35 million on someone that they don't even think might be here next year. So I just think that planning is so infuriating that I have a hard time caring about who they go for. And
what about Kyle Walker and João Felix? Are you guys going to bring up my Ronaldinho João Felix quote?
No, because I love CDK and he didn't score a goal for Milan, so I can't talk.
I love if you're juggling berries on YouTube, João Felix is your guy.
I thought Hachima Store.
I thought Master was your guy.
Yeah, I mean, Master is like a discount store.
He's
It depends the
restarting.
kind of berry. But yeah, no, Mastur, I think did you guys see the Gazzetta
Yeah.
article on him? They did a big spotlight on him. That's funny that he's
Mhm.
back in our lives. But you're right about the January transfer signings. Those were done with very little
They were
foresight of
trying to
knowing
save
that
face to make tough
Conceição was
moves.
going to leave. You knew pretty much that Conceição at the end of the season, this was just a stopgap because if you really wanted him, you would have gotten him last summer. And now you filled these two guys, the two guys, João Felix and Kyle Walker, that came over. These are guys that really didn't have much of a future, right? Because we knew the buyout, even if João Felix went well, we knew the buyout would have been crazy. I mean, look, 50 million is what Al Ahly just paid Chelsea for João Felix, right? Santi Jimenez, he's a fine player, but he's the opposite of what Max Allegri goes for. So at the end of the day, we're left, it feels every single year almost since 2012. We're left in the same position, having the same discussions every August, and it's at this point like it's nauseating for me
Yeah, that's
because
exactly
it's
what.
like we it's nauseating because you guys have watched Milan your whole lives. I've watched Milan my whole life. We can see the bad moves before they happen, and it's not to pat ourselves on the back, but I think most
We
people who
want to
have
be
watched
wrong.
Milan their whole life can look at these guys who have not and who are in high positions at Milan and aren't even football fans that you can see from a mile away that it's just not going to work, and that's the infuriating thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they just sold one of them to Flamengo.
Yeah.
So
I hear my kids going crazy upstairs. So I'm gonna have to leave you in a second, guys.
yes.
No, you're fine.
So we'll just jump right into the prediction for what Milan is
Let's do
this
it.
season. I think this is the real big question. Is the second star coming, or is it just a Napoli repeat? For me, I think it's a Napoli repeat. I think a lot of the conversation guys around, oh, Conte, it's Europe. He doesn't handle multiple competitions well. He's won multiple leagues while being in Europe. That's not actually really the discussion. It's the European display that's subpar. And now he won the league last year with arguably his weakest team that he's ever had in terms of like winning a title. They got a lot better. I think they're going to be a lot better. I think Inter's weaker. I don't think Juve are anything to boast about. I don't think Milan are impressive. The Juric hiring at Atalanta is
Roma.
bizarre to me.
Roma looks good.
And then Roma with Gasparini. I still don't think Roma have everything Gasparini's already complaining about signings. What is Milan's season? I think it's
I'm
top
gonna give you
four.
a top four, and it's gonna be highly controversial, but it's
Go
fine.
for
I
it.
don't care. Napoli win the Scudetto. I think Inter come in second place, Milan come in third, and Roma are in fourth. Juventus out of the top four.
Wow.
That's how I see it right now. I think Gasperini magic is going to translate to Roma. He has some brilliant, talented players. Imagine what he can do with some of these attackers that Roma have. I'm really excited about Roma. I think probably the most excited just because of Gasperini. I believe in that man so much. But I think Milan's going to be in the Champions League position. I wouldn't be surprised if they challenge for a Scudetto, even if it's not the prettiest. I think this is what Max Allegri can bring. And he has some players that really will fit into his system, especially on the counterattack going forward. So I have Milan in the Champions League position. Realistically, I don't think they're going to win the Scudetto, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're not that far off at the end of the season.
Agreed. Sant'Angelo, your prediction, even though we're still a month.
Yeah, it's tough because there's so many crucial pieces they still need to bring in, and we don't really know how that's going to play out. But I'm going to say loosely it's top four. I think the fact that Allegri moves the needle more so than any previous coach Milan have hired. I do like Modric. I do like Ricci. The midfield seems much more improved. I think he'll be able to stabilize this team enough to avoid those sort of miserable spells that Milan endured all of last season. And I think we'll squeak on into the top four because I do think that, again, Juventus, they're a whole nother animal. They feel more miserable than Milan probably should right now, based on what I'm seeing.
They have more resources than they do.
Yeah, they look poor. Atalanta under Juric, which was an interesting signing. That's going to be very fascinating to watch unfold because it's a new era for them. So I think Milan might be in a position where they might be able to take advantage of the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty amongst their contemporaries in the league, and I think they'll get top four.
A quick name that not a lot of people have heard of that I think might make a splash, Kamaldeen Sulemana. Juric coached him at Southampton. He liked him so much he convinced Atalanta to sign him. He's an incredibly fun dribbler to watch. He might not score a lot, but he's going to be all action. Atalanta's a mystery to me at the moment. I think that it's quite a sizable drop-off. But I think we're all in agreement, though, right? There's good news for Milan fans that have endured so much pain that we all think they're going to challenge for Champions League.
They'll love the top
one
four
game a week, guys. I mean,
I know.
Why not?
No, I mean, listen, just the final point. They were just 7 points off top four. and they were terrible. And there were
That's a good point.
a dozen matches where you're sitting there saying, should have won that, shouldn't have dropped points. They're better than that. And we'll see if Max changes that. But Bonetti, we'd like to thank you so much for coming on and joining us. This was a lot of fun. We really appreciate your insight. Again, guys, Paramount Plus, CBS, go and watch Serie A this year if you haven't already. I would assume you have. If you're watching this, again, we really appreciate everything and taking your time to do this because I know the kids are going crazy. And then congratulations for England for winning the Euro. So I guess it'll be a nice celebration in your household.
I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet as a fan.
You.
But guys, great
anything
job.
Yeah.
Great job with this podcast. Anything else? I'm quite excited about the Serie A season, guys. I really am. I think there's a lot of intrigue with Napoli, with Roma, with Milan certainly because of Modric coming in. We got a Ballon d'Or winner coming to Serie A. Yeah, Roma's a big one, guys. We're expecting a really fun season. I can tell you that the ratings are improving every single year, especially Milan. Milan's ratings are honestly, they're blowing a lot of teams away. Obviously, the Jimenez and Pulisic connection with North America helps a lot. But yeah, we'll keep doing the studio show every week. Hopefully, we'll call a lot of Milan games that matter. And thanks for having me, and keep up the good work.
Of course. Thanks, Matteo.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Yeah, take care. Yeah, thanks to Bonetti. And just a real quick sign off for this. Again, we appreciate all you guys and all the support that you have given us. So again, subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, That Milan Podcast. Give us a 5-star rating. Give us rave reviews. Let us know what you thought of Bonetti's commentary, what you think of his commentary on CBS. Again, Santangelo, any other final comments or stuff? I think you're rumored to want to start an Instagram account.
Yeah, so I'm tossing around the idea of doing a football-driven IG account. So a lot of the same opinions, content that I post on my X, Twitter account, whatever, carry some of those things out on Instagram. I know you guys love that platform too. Just trying to expand, give you guys more content, more insight, perspective. So we'll see how that plays out. Would like to do it before the season starts so I could start fresh, but we'll wait and see. Of course, anything that I'm working on, you guys can get up to date on that on Twitter at Matt_Santangelo. And of course, thank you to the community. Thank you to Matteo for being generous with his time on a Sunday. Guys, you guys in the comments, you guys viewing this video, you're taking time out of your day. So we appreciate you guys joining along and making these sort of these interviews with Matteo possible. So thank you.
And we appreciate all the feedback. Shout out to Stinker once again for the thumbnail quickly turned around. Sorry about Matt's ceiling fan.
It's off. It's off. Maybe I'll get it out of frame next.
But again, subscribe here. Follow us over there on the other YouTube channel for That Milan Pod. Again, That Milan Podcast on TikTok doing very well. We're doing very well on Twitter. As on top of that, it's just been a lot of success, even though we're a very tumultuous club at this moment in time. But again, we really appreciate all you guys. I mean, the support has been there. This is why I think it's one of the greatest, if not the best fan base in the world. So again, thank you guys at Martino Puccio everywhere. And other than that, thanks for listening and take care.